Good afternoon, Dr. Victor Fung, Chairman Mr. Chen Yankee, Professor Roland Ching, Professor John N. Erni, honorable guests, and fellow students. It is my greatest pleasure to welcome all of you here to the inaugural lecture. How do we inhabit openness? Rethinking Whole Person Education by Professor John Erni, Fung Hon Chu Endowed Chair of Humanics. My name is Heidi Wong. I'm a Year 4 student majoring in English Language and Literature and English Language Teaching, and it's my honor to be your MC today. To begin with, may I invite Professor Roland Ching, President and Vice Chancellor, to deliver his welcoming remarks. President Ching, please.
First of all, Victor, thank you for visiting me. It's been many years. Victor and I know each other for quite a while. So it's welcome to campus, and all the other friends, welcome to campus as well. Friends of the Fung Hon Chu Foundation, of course, our council chairman, our students, our colleagues, and our speaker, John. We're all ready to listen to your talk on how to educate whole person. Okay. This is an inaugural lecture, of course, by John Erni, of the Endowed Professorship called Fung Hon Chu Endowed Professorship of Humanics. Being a nerd, IT nerd, I have to look up the dictionary, what Humanics stand for writing this speech, and I'll talk about that later. We're very honored to have Victor and the foundation members to be here on campus. Endowed professorship is a very big deal. It's not simply a title. To the endowed professor, in this case John, it is the highest academic recognition in a university that can honor a faculty member. To the university, endowed professorship means that from now on until eternity, wow, we will have the needed resources to attract and retain the best academic to hold this professorship. To our students, many of you are sitting here, it means that generations and generations of students will be nurtured by a distinguished scholar. So endowed professorship is a very big deal. To the Fung's family and the foundation members who make this possible, the Fung Hon Chu Endowed Professorship is an everlasting tribute to the late Mr. Fung Hon Chu. This tribute will last for as long as university exists. I hope that university will exist forever. Year after year, generation after generations, this endowed professorship will nurture countless number of students who will contribute to humanity. Their contribution to this particular endowed professorship is made possible by the foundation and Mr. Fung Hon Chu and their two sons, Victor and William, whom we know quite well. This timing of this endowed professorship is perfect. The establishment of this endowed professorship marked the 100th anniversary of the Li and Fung Group. Oh, Victor, I don't know you're that old. Which is founded by Mr. Fung Hon Chu's father, not Fung Hon Chu himself, Victor's grandfather, by the name Mr. Fung Pak Liu. Okay. When the business was passed on to the second generation, Mr. Fung Hon Chu made Li and Fung one of the leading household trading company in Hong Kong and this region. But Mr. Fung was not only a shining business icon, he made immense contribution to Hong Kong, serving as a member of the Urban Council and a Legislative Council. For his distinguished public service, he was awarded an OBE in 1965. Dr. Victor Fung and Dr. William Fung, sons of Mr. Fung Hon Chu, are also brilliant entrepreneurs. With their extraordinary leadership and global vision, they steered the Li and Fung Group, which is now called the Fung's Group, to operate on a global scale, transforming it into an international renowned business conglomerate. Like the late father, Mr. Fung care about Hong Kong and lend their never-ending support to higher education and research. Through the Fung Hon Chu Foundation, the Li and Fung Foundation, and the Victor and William Fung Foundation, they have made generous donations with everlasting impact, such as many examples. I'll quote a few here. The Fung Scholar Programs, which a lot of our students benefit. The Fung Service Leadership Initiative, which started in the year 2012, when we changed from 3 to 4 years, emphasizing general education. And the Asia Global Institute, AGI. These are long-lasting impact to education in Hong Kong. The endowed professorship of Humanics is very timely and very visionary, especially at a time that technology development, STEM, and economics seemingly are the only focus in town, as if we have forgotten the importance of a study of human nature and human affairs. That's how I look up the dictionary. Humanics is a study of human nature and human affairs, such as equality, respect, ethic, culture, and the arts. We are grateful that this endowed professorship reminds us all the importance of our arts and humanities. I also applaud our today's star speaker. I know that many of you come here, especially students, not just because we serve food outside, but of the attractive, good-looking photos of Professor John Erni, which is also the background. Now you have a chance to see him in person. But I'm also sure that you come here because of John's intellect. He's an important figure in the local Asia-Pacific, in the world, academic world, with more than a quarter century of high-impact work on the broad range of subjects in humanities. He's a strong advocate promoting humanistic education and research. As a leading public intellectual, he frequently appears in various media in Hong Kong and the world, ranging from topics ethnic minorities, visual media, and youth cultures. I'm sure that you will enjoy John's presentation. Thank you very much.
May I invite Dr. Victor Fung, Chairman of the Fung Hon Chu Foundation and Group Chairman of the Fung Group, to deliver a speech to us. Dr. Fung, please.
Chairman Chang, Roland, John, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, staff and students. It really gives me great pleasure and great honor to join you all at this inaugural lecture by Professor Nguyet Erni of the Fung Hon Chu Endowed Chair of Humanics. I too needed to look up the meaning of humanics, but I'm glad you've already given the definition. On behalf of the Fung Hon Chu Foundation, I would really like to take this opportunity to congratulate John once again for his conferment of this title and thank him for his academic commitment to this discipline. I have strong faith that this endowed chair will enable him to carry out more advanced research to enhance Hong Kong Baptist University's whole person education, heighten its unique strengths in holistic teaching, and to make even more profound and substantial intellectual contributions to the field. I totally agree with Roland that in this age where we talk so much about technology, it is so easy to forget the human side of what we are really all about. And the more we focus on STEM, the more we focus on technology, and I'm not against that at all. I think we need the balance that whole person education and humanics can offer. In this increasingly complex and globalized world, we require intersecting forms of knowledge to tackle the host of multifaceted issues. In particular, future leaders, like all of you and the students I understand in the other room, all future leaders should be aware of how our world and history are made and be committed to shaping our future from a global perspective. The study of humanics and the whole person education, which integrates a spectrum of studies in all the areas of humanity, arts, and so on, as Roland has said, is therefore totally indispensable. It can enrich people's intellectual lives and offer important insights into the current and future conditions. In view of this, the Foundation endowed a chair in Humanics in 2006 at the Hong Kong Baptist University in support of the mission of the whole person education. I myself was searching for a true definition, especially in Hong Kong's context, of whole person education. Now, through these past 13 years, Baptist University have shown us what whole person education is all about. And I equate this very closely to the liberal arts education that I'm somewhat little more familiar with, having been educated in the United States. So it was really this first ever endowed chair of the university that we really take pride in marking such a historic milestone, as well as playing a role in the university's endowed chair scheme. I hope that scheme has now been increased and prospered to many different endowed chairs. The naming of this endowed chair under the Fung Hon Chu Foundation bears for me additional and special significance. It pays tribute to my late father, Mr. Fung Hon Chu, and serves as a memento of the 100th anniversary of the Li and Fung Group. You know, my father actually has dedicated much of his life to public service. And I think even when we were young, we were always reminded of our obligations to give back to society. And I think that's how I was brought up, and I think this is a very fitting memento of how I remember my father. Apart from this significant undertaking, the foundation has also been active in supporting other causes in education and really promoting different initiatives in higher education, both in Hong Kong and overseas. As I think Roland mentioned earlier, I think the Fung Foundation has supported, for example, the Fung Scholars Program, where we actually send students before graduation in their junior year abroad for 1 year or at least one term experience in another university somewhere overseas. We feel that it's very important to give young people, before they graduate, some experience outside their normal environment, and that will have a lasting impact on their future thinking and future careers. Hong Kong Baptist University is the first tertiary institution in Hong Kong that advocates and implements whole person education, and is now a leading provider of whole person education in the whole region. With a commitment to nurturing students to become responsible global citizens, the university's vision is true to the idea of humanities, helping students think out of the box, analyzing problems critically, and respect differences. Respecting differences and thinking about inclusive growth, I think, is where we all have to be thinking about today. These qualities are crucial for addressing the needs of our time, stemming from increasing inequality and intolerance. I would like to take this opportunity to express my own appreciation to the university for its relentless efforts and its ever greater progress in promoting all these areas. I also hope that this endowed chair can provide an impetus to advance its level of research and development of whole person education, which helps broaden young people's minds and vision, as well as nurture the next generation of outstanding all-round leaders for our community. So this afternoon, John, we're going to share your insights. I trust it will be an inspiring lecture. I'm really looking forward to it. And just like all of you, I hope that we will be learning tremendous words of wisdom from John this afternoon. Thank you very much.
May I now invite Dr. Albert Chow, Vice President, Teaching and Learning, to introduce today's speaker, Professor Nguyet Erni, Fung Hon Chu Endowed Chair of Humanics. Dr. Chow, please.
Dr. Fung, Chairman Cheng, Professor Chin, Professor Erni. Ladies and gentlemen, students, colleagues. When I first joined the university 2 years ago, it was the summer. John was away, and I was away for some time as well. So it didn't take me, I think, until September that I first met John. And during those 2 months, I just don't remember how many times I was told by a colleague, you have to beat John. John is very good. John is well liked by students. John can answer every call. Whatever you need to do, seek help from John. And John is very handsome. And John speaks perfect Cantonese. So finally, I got a chance to meet John. And I think John met all these descriptions and indeed exceeded them. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Professor John Erni, Fung Hon Chu Endowed Professor of Humanics today. John is Chair Professor and Head of Department of Humanities and Creative Writing in our university. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Whitworth University, Master of Arts degree in Film Studies from University of Oregon, and doctorate degree specializing in media and cultural studies from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, the Fighting Illini. We don't like them. Sorry. Roland and I went to a different school. Sorry. Okay, fine. Okay. Later, he took a Master of Law degrees to study international human rights law at the University of Hong Kong, with the aim of mastering the philosophy and language of law so as to conduct research and social justice issues arising from intersecting legal, social, and political contexts. But prior to all these qualifications, there was one qualification which was very important. John got the honorary diploma in English language and literature from Hong Kong Baptist College. Can I mention a year? 1985. Okay, so John is one of our very own. Professor Erni has published in the areas of international and Asia-based media and cultural studies, human rights philosophy and politics, gender studies, youth popular culture studies, and critical public health studies. In the past decade, one of his primary studies falls on ethnic minorities in Hong Kong, due in part to his multicultural upbringing. Professor Erni is a mixed Filipino, Vietnamese, Chinese, having lived in Vietnam, the Philippines, Hong Kong, and the States. In recent years, John has also received a number of grants to study issues related to human rights and cultural citizenship. He is now leading several interdisciplinary cultural studies research projects in collaboration with renowned overseas institutes or universities. Professor Erni brings to his research a unique vision of Western theories in cultural studies and local cultural experience in a Chinese context. As Dr. Fung said, this kind of background or global ableness or interdisciplinarity are indeed the kinds of attributes we would like to cultivate in all our BU graduates. So students sitting here, well, Professor John Erni is your role model. In the community, Professor Erni has been a member of civil society groups and given staunch support to many NGOs. He provides consultation to the media and speaks for the minorities. At present, he is also building an international platform to line up professionals in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Hong Kong to jointly work on international migrant rights issues. This is a very, very important topic globally. Professor Erni is the immediate past president of Hong Kong Academy of Humanities. He has been a recipient of the Gustafson, Rockefeller, Lincoln, and Annie Burt Fellowships, and a visiting professor in Australia, UK, and Singapore. In 2006, he won the Top Paper Award at the 56th Annual Convention of the International Communication Association in Germany. The topic for today's lecture, I have to be very careful. I don't want to pronounce the fourth word wrong. How do we inhabit openness? Not inhibit openness, okay? How do we inhabit openness? We're thinking whole person education. The humanities play a special role in instilling a love of freedom and a strong sense of creativity, both of which are much needed in times of increasing global complexity, as Dr. Fung and Professor Chin has talked about. Based on Professor Erni's cultural research on minority, he will share his thinking on the question of openness that he believes can reinvigorate the ethos of whole person education, particularly through the concept of critical diversity. I'm sure that you will find inspiration and insight from Professor Erni's sharing, and please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Erni. Thank you.
Dr. Victor Fung, Council Chair, President Chin, Albert, who introduced me in a very lovely manner, and all my esteemed colleagues, the VPs, provosts, students, my colleagues in my own department, Humanities and Creative Writing, and many friends. To say that I'm deeply, deeply honored is an understatement. But what I want to say to start with is how deeply moved I am by some of the speeches that you just heard. I'm deeply moved by the fact that there are people who are of great influence in not just the education sector, but also in the business sector in our society who appreciates humanities. I cannot say this more strongly on behalf of myself, of course, but also many brilliant and world-class humanists who are also sitting in this room and working at HKBU. We have a very strong Faculty of Arts with many top scholars in the general field of humanities. I am one of the representatives and lucky enough to be able to speak to you on something that many of us care about. Now, I am not trained in education theory, but I'd like to believe that I'm an educationist of some sort for over 25 years. I looked up the word humanic as well. Because this is a, I've been using it interchangeably with the word humanities, but I found out that this word actually has profound meaning, associated with a long tradition, indeed in the liberal arts tradition, emphasizing whole person education, meaning the search for the delicate balance between the intellect, passion, and the human spirit. I think that idea is a glorious idea that would never go out of time, would never be outdated. And indeed, listening to Dr. Fung and our president, who emphasize that in this day and age, this is needed perhaps even more than ever. I think whole person education, to me, is a slightly peculiar idea, and I'll explain to you in a moment. My interest, of course, is immediately drawn to the very notion of the whole person. What is the wholeness that one could possibly develop as a person? Now, I do want to leave it to the educationists in the room to figure out how to put it into educational practices, because you are the experts in psychology or sociology or social work. But in the kind of work that I do, I have developed an understanding and through which I want to make a sort of a humble proposal to you this afternoon through this talk. Let me first make, without ambiguity, the following declaration. There is no such thing as a whole person. It does not exist. Now, to say that one could aspire to set as one's goal to become a whole person is one thing, but whether something actually is only an illusion is another. I think I'm straddling between two kinds of ideas. I like the aspiration, but I don't want to confuse the possibility, the imminence of that idea with the socially and historically constituted reality of personhood. Now, I don't mean to upset my humanist friends in the room, but neither do I want to appease to the disciples of post-structuralism in the room. For me, through the kind of cultural studies research and thinking that I've been conducting in the areas of ethnic minority studies and studies of migrants, how that kind of social and human reality, many of it is human suffering actually, intersects with gender, youth's cultural experience, and human rights issues. These are some of the issues I've been struggling with, as it were, over the years. For about 2 decades now, what I've learned is that personhood is neither a relatively fixed, complete entity in the classical definition of humanity, nor the ephemeral, always shifting performative construction as professed by the deconstructionists. I know some of you are sitting in the room, okay? So the question I want to share with you this afternoon is how do we inhabit personhood in an open manner, acknowledging that incompleteness could be a gift? Or more broadly, how do we inhabit openness in an unfolding, interconnecting, vibrant, and enjoyable horizon? Now, how many times have we encountered the saying, to be open, have an open mind, be adventurous, right? Try new things. Especially in an education environment, we craft our visions around the need to train our students to be open-minded individuals who are ideally cross-culturally exposed, what are the buzzwords? Multiply linguistically competent and globally actionable. I think those are the real goals, don't get me wrong, okay? But I'm trying to figure out a way in which these can be achieved. In modern education, to meet the challenges of the increasingly complex world, we liberal thinkers form our curriculum around the open through theoretical variants like comparative culturalism and moral variants like diversity training. This is all good. Indeed, we know what it feels like to liberate our minds from the dreads of parochialism. How much suffering in the world, warfare, and social conflict arise from ethno-nationalist, provincialist, nativist, and fundamentalist sectors of our societies of various shades and persuasions. We would not have arrived at our modern liberal university as we know it today if we had not fought hard and won the battle to liberate our education from the hands of the elites toward the vision and democratic practice of cosmopolitanism broadly defined. Yet once we try to pin down the open within established categories and conventions of thought, no experience could be more elusive. What is the open? Does it circulate in the deliberative classroom, in the student unions and reading groups, or yet in the undefined wayward itineraries of exchange experiences? Are these the same or different? If the ambience of globalization surrounds our educational planet, and the sky of cosmopolitan diversity arches over our heads, then what is the shape or form can the person who aspires to be whole exist in relation to them? I want to make a humble suggestion to you this afternoon that instead of thinking about inhabited society as composed of exclusive spheres of the self, as an entity surrounded by familiar faces of the family, friends, and lovers, separated by the degree of exposure to class, education, and cultural capital, we need to attend to the fluxes of strangers. Moreover, we need to learn to form relationships with them. I want to contrast our comfort zone of imagined wholeness populated by the familiar with the search for another feeling through making external tactile contact with the unfamiliar in our surroundings and to mingle with those unacquainted, even unknown elements. To cite the British anthropologist Tim Ingold, who studies environmental psychology, of which I'm going to draw something out of it in the next few minutes from environmental psychology, which is really not my own field. But as humanists, we roam around, we check out different sets of knowledges to see what works, what applies to our own thinking. Now he says, as we live and breathe the wind, light, and moisture of the open sky, bind with the substances of the earth in the continuing forging of a way through the tangle of lifelines that comprise the land. So I want to grapple with that metaphor for a little while with you. If I ask you to draw the open sky, what would you put down on paper? Now, the cognitive relationists in the room might quickly come to the realization that to draw the open, empty sky, you would have to outline its relation to other objects, such as clouds, rainbows, and of course objects on Earth from which the sky can be observed. But the spiritualists in the room may suggest that drawing the sky is impossible. The empty sky is best left to meditative flights of imagination and mindful visualization, and not to the boundedness of lines and shapes that you could put down on paper. Tim Ingold, that British anthropologist I cited earlier, relates to us some of the debates in the fields of cognitive and developmental psychology concerning how children would deal with this problem. I think sometimes it really helps to think like a child, because then you can really clear your thoughts without so many clutters in your heads. I think this is one of the directions that he's suggesting that I want to follow a bit anyway. Now, he uses some of the debates in experimental child psychology to illustrate a problem relevant to the idea of how does one draw a sky, right? Now, he tells us a number of studies has challenged fundamental presuppositions that children everywhere, regardless of cultural background, initially bring to their cognitive reasoning, not about the sky, but about the earth, because we live on the earth, right? Now, there are two major presuppositions, apparently, in that field of inquiry, very clearly, that to children, the ground is flat, number one, and secondly, that unless supported, things fall. Simple enough. Now, the general representation, therefore, that is often presented to school children of this figure of a spherical earth upon which stands these Lego-like human figures would render those two presuppositions incorrect. In this picture, the ground isn't flat and gravity doesn't apply, since some of the figures from the round edges would have fallen off the earth. Now, there's a bit of counter-intuition that needs to bring to the table here in understanding this kind of thing, that the earth, counterintuitively, is round like a ball, and that people can live anywhere on its surface without falling off. Now, this, to many of these researchers, calls for a completely new conceptual understanding of the child's mind. Here you have the classical and long-standing debate about whether knowledge acquisition in children is strongly constrained by their innate, so-called naive mental structures, or more dependent on socio-cultural context of learning. In other words, do we possess some intuitive understandings of the world as children based largely on experiences through our sight, hearing, smell, and tactile contacts, understandings that may be distorted by subjective perception and would therefore color our subsequent cognitive development? Or, as we grow up, did we begin with a sort of open mind, a proverbial blank sheet of paper upon which knowledge is grafted bit by bit? Now, both accounts, the intuitionist camp and the developmentalist camp, are obviously correct. This is my humanist side speaking, which believes that our encounter with the world is shaped by both our first-hand immersive experience in it and the social and cultural scaffolding of loosely fragmented knowledge accumulated through time and space. This is where I want to locate the question of the open, or inhabiting the open, in this double imagination. I share Tim Ingold's insight that when a child is asked to think about the shape of the earth, he or she combines an intuition based on their grounded experiences and their manner of adding in more and more layers of understanding through learning. He goes on to cite two examples which I love. There is first a drawing made by a 6-year-old, Ethan. He tells the researcher that the earth has the shape of a ball, that to see it one should look downwards, and that is completely surrounded by space. Now, after asking him to draw the earth, the researcher asked Ethan to draw the sky. Ethan is perplexed. The sky has no shape, he protests. "Oh, you mean space?" You know, he watches space intergalactic fights or something, these kind of movies, or you play video games, right? "Oh," so he says, "you mean space." So he proceeded to draw, to describe a ring around the circle depicting the Earth. To him, the sky is something that envelopes the Earth, as represented literally by a ring drawn around the round-shaped Earth. Now, he must have also been told that there is land and ocean in the Earth, and maybe a chocolate chip cookies lying somewhere in the outer space. Now, this experiment tells us that to understand the Earth, one also needs to attend to the nature of the sky, and how the ground is the connector between the two. There's a second example, very, very quickly. 9-year-old, Darcy. She draws around Earth and has added moon and some stars. The researcher asked Darcy, as she did with Ethan, to draw the sky. Like Ethan, Darcy is thrown by it. "It's icky," she says. Her solution, however, is to sketch some roughly horizontal lines, looking much like a cloud base near the top of the paper, and above her, drawing of the Earth, moon, and stars. When the researcher asks, "Where do people live?" she draws a house whose base lies along the bottom border of the paper. The researcher asks again. Something's not quite right, right? And Darcy draws another house on the side. On the third request, Darcy eventually gives in to the researcher's implicit demands, rubs out one of her houses on the left, and draws a stick figure, I don't know if you can see it, upon her round Earth. But this only sparks off a further bout of interrogation. The researcher asks, "This house is on the Earth, isn't it?" Pointing to the sketch of that house near the bottom of the paper. "How come the Earth is flat here, but before you made it round?" The following dialogue ensues. Darcy answers, "Because it's on the ground, right? We live on the ground." She apparently associated the bottom of the drawing paper as the ground, right? And then the researcher replies, "But why does that make it look flat?" "Because the ground's flat. But the shape of the Earth is round." To the researcher, it seemed that Darcy was being completely inconsistent, wavering between conceptions of the Earth's surface as round and flat. But Tim Engel comments that what the researcher failed to observe was that Darcy was being absolutely consistent in applying a distinction between the Earth and the ground. As Darcy explains, the Earth is indeed round. However, the houses people live in are built on the ground, and the ground is flat. Thus, the houses in her drawing were on the ground and not on the Earth's surface at all. Very smart child. Slightly schizophrenic, but these examples were used to illustrate some of our cognitive processes of thinking about how to inhabit the Earth. We kind of go between objective science on the one hand and subjective, experientially formed knowledge on the other. While the inhabitants know a great deal about our earthling surroundings, their ability to articulate what the sky is much weaker. Yes, we know how to draw the stars and the clouds and the moon, but the manner in which we imagine the sky is but a mirror image of how we interpret the Earth. That is to say, the sky is furnished by various objects like the Earth. But the biggest hidden problem here is that for most of us, we fail to see the simple truth that to understand the Earth, we need to crucially begin to think about the nature of the sky, and vice versa. Most of us are quite literally stuck on the ground, which we understand to be the surface that connects everything, the Earth underneath me and the sky above me. Stuck and earthbound, our faint understanding of the sky and the elements in it would give us a metaphorical problem of some great importance, I think. So let me come back to Earth a little bit, so to speak. It seems to me that from a humanistic anthropological and cultural perspective, the designation of the whole person demands our ability to navigate among the boundedness of society, the groundedness of our lived experience, and the openness of a seemingly boundless horizon. I have an idea that this open horizon moves with and is moved by strangers. However, most of us are creatures who move with and are moved by the familiar. In ordinary circumstances, our environment, which ought to be conceived of as an interesting unbounded horizon, is often cluttered by familiar objects. These furnitures that form our society confine us, but they make living possible. In these terms, a boundaryless horizon might be uninhabitable and often arouse fear of the unknown. As a result, we roam the earth as if on a stage set, and in this way, we're fated to pick our way amidst the clutter of the world. So I want to now turn to some other person, an adult in this case, and I'm learning something from this lady, this woman. I'll tell you a bit about her story to further clarify some of my thinking. And this is connected to a new research project that had just launched earlier this year, having to do with an organization. I know the executive director is sitting in the back, so I need to be careful what I say about Vulture. Okay. About 2 years ago, I encountered a Hong Kong-based organization that provides young people around the world with volunteering opportunities. Combining volunteer work with traveling, the organization calls itself Vulture, which is a name that comprises the sweats of volunteerism and the pleasure of traveling. Established in 2009, it is a unique organization of its kind. I think there's no other comparable organization like it operating from our city. Up until 2016, Vulture has provided, coordinated, or linked up over 4,000 international work camps and voluntary service projects in over 55 countries each year. You can correct me with my statistics later, Bert, okay? Since its inception, more than 4,000 Vultureteers, they call themselves, very cute, right? From Hong Kong, have participated in work camps mainly in Japan, Mongolia, India, Nepal, Cambodia, Taiwan, Thailand, and also far away in Europe, Latin America, and Africa. This got me interested in research on youth volunteering and pitted my fascination to ask, in this age of dwindling economic opportunities, of broken promises by many governments, and even of widespread cynicism among our youth, why are there large droves of young people flocking to do international volunteering work? Has there been an underlying revival of youth idealism despite the harsh reality of social disillusionment and economic precarity? Are we now in the 60s, the new 60s, as it were? Now, much of the critique, now this phenomenon has been strongly criticized, by the way, if you just check out the literature. And much of the critique centers on two qualities of those volunteers. First, they're amateurs only, implying a lack of real professional knowledge and skills to help make concrete or lasting impact to the host communities. And secondly, the privilege, implying a problematic form of benevolence guided by the touristic gaze, which is too often entangled in a first world imperial impulse. Yet studies show that many of these volunteers today are in fact pre-professionals who have fallen through the cracks of an economic system in decline, including students who study in non-award courses overseas, and semi-employed or out of work youth who have not been able to secure full-time employment at home. It remains to be discovered what kind of social and cultural capital they are able to bring with them, yes, as amateurs, to do the kind of cultural translation work they are able to practice in a transnational context. Equally, we do not know enough about the possible forms of relatedness with total strangers that take place in such encounters when a sense of privilege, yes, may be mixing with practices of adaptation, uncertainty, reverse identification, and even solidarity. So the common critique that you read about this kind of international youth volunteer activities casts suspicion on the simple-mindedness of good intentions, but yet they seem to have neglected to look at the complexity, if not the struggles, brought about by youth's own thinking about their own familiar life, which is filled with routines and boredom, and exam pressures, of course. So Sarah is the person I want to speak about. She's rather famous in Vulture. In 2012, Sarah was a second-year student in college in Hong Kong. She applied for her first Vulture program to join a physical handicapped and able-bodied work camp in Switzerland. So the story I'm about to tell you comes from an in-depth interview we had with Sarah earlier this year. Sarah chose Vulture for two reasons: the low travel costs and the meaning she sought through volunteering. What pushed her outward was the cruelty she saw in the medical system during her internship in a public hospital in Hong Kong. She wanted to study to become a physical therapist, but what she witnessed instead is the fragility of human life, and was particularly disappointed by the traumatic situation when patients were forced to leave the hospital before they had fully recovered. The work camp Sarah joined was entitled Access for All, which was located in a Little Witten hostel run by an NGO supporting the deaf community in Switzerland. She was grouped in a team with 3 other Asians and 7 Europeans, 1 deaf woman from Japan, a blind woman from Slovakia, and a near-blind local woman joining with other able-bodied people. The volunteer work was not much related to her own training. The team, what did they do? They did some common daily tasks, such as cleaning rivers, fixing the garden road, and sweeping in the hostel. But one day, when they were planning a walk to the lake, Rico, who was deaf, was furious about something and refused to go with them. Rico even wanted to leave the work camp. Furiously, she took out the info sheet, pointing at the rules that says you should care for and help each other, and accusing the fellow campers that they all failed to do so. Because of her disability, the other teammates had difficulty understanding her. Now, the conflict was not resolved until Sandy, who was blind, intervened. They talked things over and Rico eventually calmed down. This incident made Sarah feel bewildered, and in her own words, utterly useless. She felt utterly useless in that context. Now, she's a trained medical personnel, as it were. So despite that background, she felt she was unable to do anything. Ultimately, the disabled teammates managed to console each other by way of technology that enabled them to communicate. So she said, I thought my experience of treating the handicapped could make me understand them better. But the fact is that they all have their own ways to manage their lives, their needs, and where things are sensitive. In other words, no amount of professional training could help. Let me just use a short quote from her. She said, I'm glad that I chose to work in an NGO because it's sort of a short-term service for patients. The choice has a lot to do with the experience I've gotten from the Vulture work camp, because I live with them and known that the disabled people have their own lives besides treating for their illnesses. So she was given a job from a hospital, but she didn't accept because she didn't want to work in a hospital. She felt like the medical system in Hong Kong was too institutionalized. Everything got standardized. Patients with different symptoms would only receive a standard treatment. Similar forms of treatment are given to everyone regardless of their life needs. She later became a member of Vulture's board and participated in a number of work camps. Now let me quickly turn to WPC, that is the project that it's called Wheelchair Challenge. This is a project that she launched in 2014. She had now registered it as an NGO herself, and she explained very simply, wheel power for the disabled people is real power. Now, supported by Vulture, she and her partners planned a hiking trip by wheelchair. But wherever they went, they encountered difficulties with wheelchairs trying to move up or downhill. Now, what may be commonly accessible to able-bodied people is often an obstacle for people in wheelchairs, indicating how invisible wheelchair users' hardship is in public space. So she and her partner decided to focus on two elements in their projects. First, training. Second, mapping. In the former, the volunteers were asked to sit on wheelchairs and move around in the city so that they could gain experience of the real situation wheelchair users face. In the latter, they accumulated barrier-free information, including the locations and routes of barrier-free facilities, and uploaded it onto an open-source mobile app. I want to skip another point here. Now, I tell you this story, and the story of many people who are doing volunteer work, and there are many different kinds, because I want to think a little bit about Sarah's open horizon. To her, the professional scientific method of treating patients provides an account of care that, like the objective account of the shape of the earth, cannot readily accommodate the phenomenon of the sky. For in relation to the sky, the earth can exist only as a flat ground of habitation. Her experience sheds light on the realization that a ground populated solely by the so-called professional people and objects can exist only within a simulacrum of the world, modeled in a familiar interior space. She shows that in the open world, on the other hand, beings relate not as closed objective in closed objective forms, but by virtue of their common immersion in the fluxes of strangeliness. Her particular devotion to the disabled, through a special understanding, and this is, I think, quite cool, she thinks about how surfaces of the disabled body interacts with the surfaces of the wheelchair, which in turn interacts with the rugged terrain of the slope of the road. And that sequence taught her the lesson that to inhabit the open is to dwell within a strangerly world in which every being is destined to touch and combine various mediums of otherness, near and far, in the continuation of its own existence. So I'm sticking to this metaphor, okay? The sky, the open sky. Because if you lift your head up, look around, upward, you must feel the strange but enlivening sensations of the wind, the rain, sound, and light, which are strictly not objects in the sky, but that which comes and goes as open, moving elements. Unpredictable, sometimes break our hearts, and sometimes scary. Now, the kind of work that I'd like to put in this context that I've been doing for a while now helps me understand some of the unique contour of the question of race, ethnicity, even racism in our own city, because of the particular cultural history, the colonial formations, the politics of language, the popular media representations, and in our human rights law and policy. I want to propose to you that, to me anyway, the best socio-cultural and political language with which to talk about the problem of race and ethnicity is the theorization about stranger relations. Now, we live in a strange place in which there's a strange silence about strangers. Took me a while to write that sentence. It is not as if in a metropolitan city like ours, we don't rub shoulders with total strangers on an everyday basis wherever we move. It seems like we do too much of that. But in the process, very few of us actually think about bringing the stranger closer. By doing something to reduce our feeling of strangeness toward one another, without interest, without fanfare, without malice, the stranger is simply an invisible creature. Now, in a more social and political register of recent years in Hong Kong, increasingly there seems to be an urgent need to grapple with the politics of stranger relations in a city that has seen more and more conflicts arising from various forms of social dissatisfactions. So there's a general sense of dissent surrounding us, producing communities of strangers. Their stranger status often fortified by negative media portrayals. We can say that a distinguishing characteristic of democratic politics in Hong Kong over the last 2 decades has been in the serial production of stranger identities. Besides the infamous and ubiquitous post-80s generation, remember that phrase? Referring to the student activists, there were other strangers such as the disgruntled working class, the migrants and ethnic minorities, the guerrilla graffiti painter, and the vulgar legislators, remember them? And many more. Now, whether it is the stranger who tends to be silent, private, or acquiescing, therefore provoking our pervasive indifference, or the stranger who is agitative, demanding, unforgivingly vocal, therefore stirring either our sympathy or our rejection depending on which political camp you're in, stranger identities proliferate like the moving wind, rain, sound, and light that animates our environment. They mediate our relation between the ground we stand on or stuck on and the open sky of which we're also inhabitants. Now, strictly speaking, we're not ex-habitants of the sky. We inhabit the world, but we're not ex-habitants of the sky. Sometimes we just call it just space, or we say icky. But I'm proposing to you that we need to know more about the strangers in our midst and to develop a relationship with them in our ongoing contemplation about how to pry an open horizon beyond our society and world in the pursuit of whole personhood. I find it increasingly important as humanists to have to reimagine the city anew as a particular space of encountering strangers. Now, there's the more academic stuff I would skip with you that I refer to, especially some classical sociologists like George Simmel, of course, comes to mind. And let me just quickly draw to the conclusion. Now, over the last 40 minutes, I think, I'm speaking for that long now, that what do we mean by whole person education? The idea that I have is that the whole person, if achievable, is someone who inhabits a space in which there are no hills, only the rising up of hills. You know the distinction? Because if you experience the hill by touching its surface and climbing on them, you would know, okay? In which there is no fire, only the burning of fire, as you will find out from the flickering flames, the swirling of smoke, and the warming of the body. In the sky, the sun and the clouds are respectively in their shining and billowing, just as the hills are in their rising, the fire in its burning. So we can say sunning, clouding, hilling, and firing. It is where all the action is. I remember this old little book that I read many, many years ago. This philosopher that very few people know about. His name is Alfonso Lingus. This little book has a peculiar title, The Community of Those Who Have Nothing in Common. You think about the contradiction in that title, okay? And let me just quote a very short passage from him. He says, beneath the rational community is another community, the community that demands that the one who has his own communal identity, who produces his own nature, expose himself to the one with whom he has nothing in common. This other community is not simply absorbed into the rational community because it recurs, it troubles the rational community as its double or its shadow. This other community is not realized in producing something in common, but in exposing oneself to the one with whom one has nothing in common, to the Aztec, the nomad, the guerrilla, the enemy. Community forms when one exposes oneself to the naked one, the destitute one, the outcast, the dying one. What if the whole person that we've been talking about this afternoon is someone whose intellectual, ethical, and spiritual substance can only be derived from immanence, arising from our will, our courage, to embrace the elements of the weather, so to speak. In fact, I would go so far as to say that we are but registers of the outsider, the foreigner, the refugee, the exile. The more we read our own narratives, the more difficult it is to ascertain with any certainty where myself ends and the others begin. For it is precisely the binding of substance and medium that the strangers leave their mark. Seen in this way, the whole person is but a vaguely defined zone of admixture and intermingling. When you have nothing in common with a total stranger, it is not like you exist nowhere in relation to them. Rather, what you have is precisely a vast space of possibility. I'm a closet Heideggerian, let me say this, okay? Nobody knows about me that I think in Heideggerian terms. I hope this is some kind of strangeness that we can all live with and educate ourselves to think about. Thank you for your attention.
I believe we've gained a lot from Professor Erni's sharing, but I guess many of you would like to know more, right? So here comes the Q&A section. May I invite Professor Erni and Dr. Chow to take their seats on the stage? Professor Erni and Dr. Chow, please.
John has raised so many questions. The first thing that I said to John when he returned to his seat was that this is really heavy stuff. This is a very heavy lecture to me. I have a lot of reflections, and I just don't know how to continue my job. Serious. To me, the word strangers can be applied to anyone. It can be applied to the Filipino domestic helper in my home. It can apply to students whom we have to work with. It can even apply to my wife, whom I don't see much these days. So I have to gather my thoughts, but let's invite the audience to answer to ask a question or two, and then we will come back, because the concept, you raised so many questions. The ground, the sky, how we scaffold, how we trust reality or our perception. What you say is completely contradictory to the classic theory of learning. Yeah, the textbook psychology definition of learning is that it is a relatively permanent change in our thoughts and behavior as a result of our experience. Okay, so anyway, maybe I'll stop here because you have achieved what I always want to achieve in our education, to stir up ambiguity and confusion. And then hopefully the learner can work it through and becomes a better person at the end. But I need time to work it through. So first question from the audience, please. Thank you for your help. Okay, Angela, and then Clayton.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful lecture.
Angela, please identify yourself. Okay.
This is Wai Ching Wong. I'm the Vice President for Programs of the United Board, an old friend of John. I really appreciate your lecture and the idea of openness and the challenge to relate to strangers, especially given your studies in immigrants and in ethnic minorities. I think that's a very, very important element to consider. But my question is, there is a recent critique of the failure of the liberal project, meaning that we have overestimated people's ability to be open, especially to strangers. I mean, all these rightist politics that have won Europe and America. So what do you think? I mean, when you first state that there is no such thing as a whole person, I mean, I fully agree with you because I think that's the goal rather than an actuality that we can really see. But if we are not so optimistic about human qualities in a way, why are we expecting all these people to be open to strangers and relate to them? Is it another utopian project like the communism that asks us to expect complete equality? So I think you must have thought about these questions. So I really want to see how you would address them.
Please.
Let me make it quick because I think this is not a very long Q&A session. Perhaps I spoke too long or something. Sorry. Now listen, Angela. Coming from you, I know the meaningfulness of this question. The quick answer is this. I want to be optimistic. Okay, the whole kind of gymnastics, mental gymnastics I put you through, with the drawings of the earth and the sky and the blah blah blah, all the rest of it, right? Is that I believe that if we change our mental structures to think in those terms, it's not that hard. Because children know this stuff as well. That's partly what I was trying to implicitly indicate. Is that we accumulate knowledge in this sort of fragmented sort of way that lead us to remember only some parts of it and forget the other parts. Mostly, we remember the parts about the earth and forgot about the parts of the sky. Now, the metaphor goes on. If I can just answer you in this way, right, with respect to the so-called failure of the liberal project, right? The metaphor goes on. You either roam the world with the ground beneath you and the sky above you, or you live in the weather system. What does it mean to live in the weather system? Right? You contend with the weather, and the weather can be friendly or it can be destructive. An overnight frost can cut a stone. Not to mention tsunamis and all that stuff. If you follow my metaphor, if you indulge me a bit here, right? Right. If you're going to draw again, just everybody draws in your own heads, right? You have a line, you have the stick figure, and then you have something on the sky. That model of understanding our relationship with our surrounding is what I would call, this is something in which you exhabitize yourself from the world. The other drawing, which I want you to draw with me in your head, is of this stick figure is moving about along with the wind, the mediums of the environment. And that is an example of what I call an inhabitance of the world. You inhabit in those elements. If you think in the other ideal model, you actually are removing yourself from being the inhabitant. You exhabitize yourself, as it were. Now, the failure of the liberal project, how much time do you have, is that I think some of the liberal projects, including human rights, which I study, I claim some authority around it, I hope. My book is coming out in a few months, first of all. Let me plug this. Now, including now, by the way, the Human Rights Project, the modern ones anyway, in the 1940s, 1950s, arose because of the failure of communism. So you brought up communism. Even that project, right, continues to paint that picture, the first picture, not the second one, until we learn how to paint another picture of human and their rights, of somebody who's weathering the weather, moving along with the mediums. Then I think the liberal projects, could have some idea of revitalizing. I'm so abstract in my answer. Am I? Yeah. I hope it makes some sense. But I think this is such a profound topic, I can only use 2 minutes to answer you in this way. Hope you appreciate it.
Can I ask if any student has the question? I always want to reserve the right to ask questions to students first. Okay, we have a colleague at the back. Okay, and then we'll come back to Kate. Okay. Please identify yourself. Yeah.
Professor Jalal Tufik, I'm a new faculty. I think the Heideggerian reference was not that hidden with the open, the sky and the earth. In relation to this issue of community, maybe I would mention some related work I've done, which basically is around mortality. And for me, mortality is not the condition of dying sometime in the future physically, but is simultaneous with our being alive. So for me, immortal is someone who's dead even while physically alive. And I think we're all mortals, so we're all in this condition. And in the condition of death, I think you're in a situation where you say every name in history is I. So we have this great letter by, at least in the handwriting of Nietzsche, where he says, this autumn I twice attended my funeral, and a few letters later he writes, every name in history is I. And so I think insofar as we are dead even while still alive, we are every name in history. And therefore, I am John, I am Friedrich, every other name. And in that sense, they are not really strangers. That's the community of the mortals. On the other hand, I think we do have the case of a real complete stranger, and that's the double. And for me, in my writing, the double is the double is me divested of everybody else. The double is me divested of every name in history. And so that's the radical stranger for me, the foreign stranger. But all others are, as mortals, a community.
I don't know what the answer, the question is, but first of all,
No question, just a
yeah.
It's a comment.
Professor Jalal Tufik just joined us as earlier this month to my department. We're lucky enough to invite him to have this appointment with us. He's very well known, a philosopher and filmmaker, by the way. So, thank you, Jalal. So Angela, I know for very long. Jalal, I don't know very much about you. Listen, I have two quick responses to you. The first one is, I kind of played a trick on all of you by saying you need to attend to the strangers, as if there are someone else out there in some weird forms. Listen, every other person sitting next to you is your stranger.
Exactly.
okay? It is like, when in class, when I taught questions about race and ethnicity, I showed a picture of me in a high school, in a local high school. Me and my friends, I was the dark skin. My question I threw at my students was, some of you remember this, right? I said, who is the ethnic person in the picture, in the photograph? Oh, that dark-skinned boy, right? Is that you, right? All that. Wrong. Every person is ethnic in that picture, which is differently ethnic. In this context, coming back, we're just differently strange to each other, but we're strangers nonetheless. So there's a bit of a trick. So there's the other real stranger, which you kind of refer to, which I need to learn from you, right? The second response, very quickly. I think that I know some of my colleagues at HKBU are developing death studies. And it has already propped up in many liberal arts universities around the world to pursue the study of death with our students, because that presses on so many profound philosophical and practical questions, right? So there's a bunch of them. I call them strange disciplines. In my paper, which I didn't get to. We need to develop some strange disciplines. Death studies is one of them. Disability studies is all the rage now in the world, right? People who theorize the question of the disabled body and subjectivity. I think those things are very much important in the liberal arts tradition for moving us forward, along with very strong kind of bread and butter disciplines that we also do, right?
Clayton, you have a question? Yeah.
First, John, thank you so much for that wonderful, provocative, challenging lecture. And that's what a great university is about, these kinds of lectures. And I thank you for giving us that opportunity. I was very interested in your comment towards the end of your talk about immanence. And so my question is a very simple one, just a yes or no answer. Just a yes or no, so it'll be over quickly. Yeah, capital letters. Which immanence suggests you're talking about community as the other, community as the stranger. But the other community you're talking about, the sort of traditional, regular, rational community, is the one that we understand. And some of us inhabit, or most of us, all of us inhabit both of those communities. So I would propose a rephrasing of the term whole person to the term whole fragmented person. Would you agree, yes or no?
A resounding yes. I made this point clear, I hope, at one point. I said, we are but registers of the other, right? In which, where does myself end and the other begins? We're not quite sure. If you read your own life narrative seriously and carefully, this might be your conclusion too. Which means that the whole person that we're understanding, which we're not breaking down into schizophrenia, right, is actually composed of the binding of substance and mediums, which I propose. So I think that is the model that I want to think through. I don't know how I'm going to do it, and I need your help and your questions. But that is the kind of way forward, I think, for whole person education. It's the binding bit, the mixture bit.
How about half person? The whole curriculum cut in half.
It is fragmented but not disconnected.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's not bonded.
It's not integrated. Yeah. It's not bond. Well, we have.
I got you thinking, didn't I? Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left for the Q&A. Any question from students? Where's the hand? Oh, okay, Maureen. Yeah, Maureen.
John, thank you very much for a really stimulating lecture. I'm Maureen Sabine. I'm a colleague with John in the Academy of Humanities, and I was a professor at Hong Kong U. My question is a concrete one, but I think it's an urgent one. Do you think your vision of whole person education might help us as a society address the very worrying trend of student anxiety and depression which we're seeing not simply here in Hong Kong, but globally?
It's a very broad question, Maureen. Maureen, by the way, is a board member of the Hong Kong Academy of the Humanities. This is a body that we need to support, that unite all the humanists and the philosophers in all of our universities. I don't know what kind of depression you're thinking about. I think about young people's depression all the time because I work with them, right? We all work with them. Right? I don't know which kind you're thinking about. Like I said earlier, I think we do need to be more optimistic. And the way I brought up Vulture as an exemplar is to show to you that even though organizations and works that organizations like Vulture do is highly complicated, possibly contaminated. Sorry, Bert. Okay. But we need to continue to find, and young people need to find these opportunities. And there seem to be more and more outlets for this kind of thing, right? So if you are depressed, I don't know what kind of depression you're in, okay? Of course, talk to people, but also, don't look down on the ground. Look up a bit more, and look around, right? And then sweat a bit. I just finished this paper that I wrote for this study on Vulture, and I ended up with an argument about the importance of sweating. Right, just read my paper. Sorry. To talk about the real hardcore materiality of youth energy and how that can be used for very good things for themselves and for the society in the pursuit of that very nebulous idea of whole personage, of whole personhood. I don't know if that answers your question, Maureen. Yeah.
But since I said I don't quite know how to continue my job, maybe I'll tell you what my puzzles are after listening to John. First, to me, a lot of students are strangers. I don't think maybe we don't. We haven't gone to the extreme that we have nothing in common, but we don't have much in common. Let me put it this way. And your example of Sarah in Vulture makes me question a lot myself. Are we the professionals? Okay, the teachers, the educators, the VPTL are professionals who are always trying to force a common form of earth, and then while ignoring the openness of the students and the openness of their future, which we don't understand and probably not able to envision. That's serious. And then in one of your earlier slides, you say the whole person needs to navigate the boundness of society, navigate between the boundness of society. That is the boundness of our university, the community, the groundedness of our lived experience. I am certainly a prisoner of my prior experience and prior thinking, preconceptions and all that. Okay? And the openness of a seemingly boundless horizon. And that is not something I can deal with, frankly speaking. It's very difficult. It is indeed very difficult. So maybe my conclusion is that since we have so many film colleagues here, to be continued. John, you have to come back. You have to come back to give more lectures. Maybe a series of lectures, not only by John, but by many colleagues and students here. I think together we have discovered what we need to do.
I think we're very lucky in HKBU to have a VPTL who's that thoughtful about these questions. No, I'm
but without a solution. Okay, so I'm still speechless. Okay, I just don't know. Anyway, but may I invite all of you to join me to thank John.